I've always hated the smell of old leather, that sickly mix of dust, time, and something forgotten. It clung to the chair beneath me as if the room itself was warning me to leave, but I didn't. I sat there, still, quiet, surrounded by people I used to call family. Across from me sat Ava, my sister, perched perfectly straight in her navy blazer. Her heels didn't touch the floor. They never did. She crossed one leg over the other like she was waiting for a verdict she already knew. Next to her, Tom slouched, arms folded, his smirk barely contained. He tapped the mahogany armrest like this was a performance he'd seen rehearsed in his head 100 times. The lawyer cleared his throat. That was the moment it all started to feel real. The envelope was cream-colored, thick, the kind that meant business. He peeled it open with deliberate fingers, the kind that have typed the same sentence over and over again for decades. I watched him closely, not because I cared for his theatrics, but because it gave me somewhere safe to look, somewhere other than Ava's smug little smile or Tom's amused glance or the empty chair where Dad should have been. The room was so quiet I could hear the click of the paperclip as he removed the final page. And then he started reading. It was a short will, concise, clinical. To Ava Monroe, I leave the beach house in Monterey. Her lips twitched, just slightly. That was her version of celebration. To Thomas Monroe, I leave the company shares in Monroe Steel. Tom chuckled under his breath. Knew it, he murmured, just loud enough for me to hear. The lawyer continued, as if nothing had been said. To my cousin Margaret, I leave the antique collection. To our family trust, I leave. And then, silence. He shuffled the papers, checked them again. That was it. No pause, no mention, no name. Not even a damn thank you. I blinked once. Just once. It felt like my body forgot how to move after that. I sat frozen, my mouth dry, my heart beating somewhere between confusion and something deeper, something colder. Turned my head slowly. Ava didn't even look at me. She was too busy adjusting her sleeve like she had better places to be. Tom glanced over, raised one eyebrow, and gave the kind of smile you save for losers. The lawyer coughed. I understand this may come as unexpected, he said, not meeting my eyes. Unexpected? No, this wasn't a mistake. This was intentional. They had all known. Every one of them. That's why no one looked surprised. That's why the chair they gave me was in the corner, not at the table. That's why Tom didn't even wear a tie. He knew he didn't have to try. I swallowed hard. My father hadn't just forgotten me. He'd erased me. I heard Ava's voice, cool and composed, say, Dad always wanted the family legacy to stay in competent hands. Tom added, can't leave Steel to someone who doesn't know a wrench from a resume. Their words didn't land like punches. They landed like needles, slow, precise, designed to numb. But here's the part they didn't know. While they were celebrating their inheritance, sipping their lukewarm coffee in leather chairs bought with borrowed egos, I was holding something else. Not a will, not a title. Deeds. 3 of them, in a folder, at home, signed by the same man who left me out of his will. Dad never talked much, but he did things, quietly. One night, long before his health started slipping, he handed me those papers with a whisper. You'll know when it's time to use them. I didn't understand what he meant back then. Now, sitting in that dim office with everyone, convinced I was the forgotten child. I finally did. They thought they'd taken everything, but I hadn't even started yet. And what's coming next? They'll never see it coming. Some people grow up with noise, laughter in the kitchen, arguments at the dinner table, music blaring from bedrooms. I didn't. Our house was made of quiet, the kind that pressed into your skin and stayed there. But in that silence, I learned everything. Dad wasn't the affectionate type. He never said, I'm proud of you, or called me buddy like the other kids' dads did. He just showed up. Every Saturday morning he'd be in the truck waiting. Engine on, thermos in hand. I never asked where we were going. I'd just slide in, buckle up, and we'd drive. No radio, no talking, just miles of road stretching between us. Sometimes he'd nod toward an old fence falling apart on a neighbor's property and say, "That one'll collapse by spring." Then he'd look at me. That meant we'd be fixing ours next weekend. That was love. In his language. Wasn't the favorite. That was always Ava. She was sharp, polished, the one who got internships with people Dad admired. Tom was the free spirit. He made everyone laugh, even Dad sometimes. Rarely, but enough to keep the spotlight. Me? I was just there. The quiet one. The helper. The kid who never made trouble but never got noticed either. Except by him, when no one else was looking. When Mom passed, he didn't say a word for days. Just stood in the garage cleaning tools that were already clean. I joined him, held the oil rag, passed him a wrench. We didn't cry. We just worked. I learned then that grief isn't always loud. Years later, when his health started to fail, I moved back in. No ceremony, no announcement. I just packed my things and showed up at his door with a duffel bag and a grocery receipt. He looked me over and muttered, "You'll stay in the upstairs room." That was it, but I could tell. He was relieved. I became his shadow. I took him to every doctor's appointment, sat through every scan, every lab test, every awkward silence with nurses trying to make small talk. I bathed him when his legs gave out, held his hand when the morphine made him forget where he was. Ava came once, maybe twice. She stood at the doorway like the hospital smell would cling to her expensive blouse. Tom brought flowers, plastic wrapped. With the barcode still on, Dad barely looked at them, but the people around us, they were watching. Uncle Rick started showing up out of nowhere, always with a bottle of something fancy and a weird grin. He'd lean over Dad's bed and say, "We've got to get you strong again, brother. The old hunting cabin needs your touch." I remember the way Dad blinked at him, slow and unimpressed. Then there was Lena. A neighbor, really. But she'd been around long enough to count as family. She'd drop off soup, fold laundry, and linger just long enough to glance at me like she wanted to say something, but never did. And Margot, the lawyer's assistant. She had this odd way of always being nearby when Dad talked about paperwork, smiling too long, asking questions that had nothing to do with her job. One day I walked in on her in the study pretending to dust while staring at his safe. When I asked if she needed something, she said, "Oh, just admiring his antique cabinet. Real craftsmanship." Right. But the moment that still haunts me was the whisper. Dad had just come out of a rough night. I was standing by the window, watching the sun try to break through. Ava leaned over to Tom by the door and said something, quiet, but not quiet enough. "Once the paperwork's sorted, it's ours." I turned. They froze. Ava covered with a cough, Tom looked away. I didn't say anything, but something inside me started to shift. Later that night, Dad was half asleep. He reached for the remote but grabbed my wrist instead. "Not everything needs to be said," he murmured. I froze. He blinked once. "But everything important should be written down." And I understood. That's when I remembered the brown folder, the one he'd handed me months ago. No explanation, just a glance and a gruff, "Keep it safe." I had, tucked away in my drawer under an old sweatshirt and a photo of us fixing the porch steps. 3 deeds, signed, witnessed, each one handwritten, while everyone else was busy chasing what they thought he'd left behind. I held what he'd truly given. I wasn't just part of the story they tried to erase. I was holding the part they never knew existed, and the silence they mistook for weakness was about to speak louder than anything they'd ever said. Grief feels different when it comes with betrayal. It doesn't sting like loss. It hollows you out, makes everything feel numb, until you hit something solid buried deep inside. That night after the will reading, I didn't sleep. I didn't cry. I didn't even take off my shoes. I just sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the old metal cabinet in the corner of the room. Dad had asked me to guard it. No context, no instructions, just a firm look and 5 words I couldn't forget: never open it too soon. But now felt like exactly the right time. I walked over slowly, crouched down, and reached behind the frame where I'd taped the small brass key. The lock clicked louder than I expected, like it had been waiting too. Inside were folders, thick, labeled in Dad's rigid handwriting. No dust, no mess, just deliberate care. The first one said, "Deeds, private." My hands shook as I opened it. 3 signed real estate transfers, all of them notarized, all of them with my name. Not Ava's, not Tom's, mine. Properties I didn't even know he still owned: an old industrial lot on the East End, a duplex near the lake, and the family cabin up north. Each one transferred 6 months before he passed. And then there was the letter. Not typed, just ink on plain lined paper, folded once. If you're reading this, then I guess they got to the will first. Let them have it. Let them believe it matters. But this land, it's yours. You earned it. Not with charm, not with promises, with presence, with silence. I put it in your name months ago. The will is for show. This is real. I closed my eyes and felt something crack inside me. Not pain, not anger. Something quieter. Validation. But the next folder. That's when the pieces began to slide into place. Inside were printed emails, dozens of them, some between Ava and the family lawyer, talking about adjusting language in the estate plan, others from Tom asking about removing certain assets for clarity, and a few from Margot. Her tone wasn't just casual, it was complicit. One read, "I've reviewed the cabinet logs. I'll make sure the originals stay buried. We just need plausible deniability. They didn't just plan around me. They tried to erase me on purpose." I drove to the notary first. Douglas Grant, a name scribbled on the corner of one deed. He met me at his small office just off Main. Thin man, gray mustache, sleeves rolled high. When I showed him the copies, he studied them and gave a single nod. "These are legit," he said. "Your dad came in alone. Said he didn't trust his lawyer anymore." I asked if he remembered the date. "Mid-September," he said. "Told me, I want this locked in before the vultures start circling." Then I went to the land registry. The building smelled like printer ink and stale coffee. I found a junior clerk named Nina. Nervous, soft-spoken, but helpful. She typed in the parcel numbers and leaned closer to the screen. "Transfer completed 6 months before his death," she whispered. "In full, all 3 properties. You're the sole listed owner." Then she looked up at me and asked, "Did someone tell you otherwise?" I nodded once. "Yeah, they tried. My last stop was Peter, Dad's accountant for over a decade. He met me at a diner just outside town, his tie loosened, his coffee half gone. When I mentioned Margot, his brow furrowed. "She asked me for duplicate statements once," he said, stirring his drink. "Said the originals were too complicated for the lawyer to parse." I asked, "Did she have that authority?" He shook his head. "None. But she acted like she already knew the outcome." That's when everything I'd overlooked came back fast. Margot misplacing a file the day I brought in Dad's tax papers. Ava always asking Dad to revisit his estate plan right after a hospital visit. Tom casually walking out of Dad's office with a folder tucked under his arm, saying it was just junk mail. I hadn't seen the pattern then now. It was all too clear. Back home, I sat at the kitchen table with the folder wide open. Deeds, letters, emails, notes, proof. Not just that I was meant to have something, but that they tried to steal it. For a long time, I sat there, staring at everything, wondering, should I walk away, let them think they won, let them celebrate while I kept the truth locked away? That would have been merciful. But then I pictured Ava sipping wine on the porch she didn't build. Tom, bragging about steel stocks he never earned. Margot, smirking in some office, thinking she outplayed everyone. And something shifted, not out of rage, not even out of spite. Just something colder, sharper. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about correction, and I was done being silent. Revenge, if it ever comes, shouldn't be loud. It shouldn't feel like a shout or a slap. The most devastating truths arrive with stillness, like morning fog over scorched earth. And I didn't want revenge. I wanted clarity. I wanted them to see what they tried to bury. I started with the deeds. I took them, along with Dad's handwritten letter, to a quiet law office 3 towns over. No flashy signs, no marble floors, just a brass plate that read, Claire Houston, Property Law. Claire was the kind of person who didn't waste words. She read everything in silence, red pen in hand, her eyes never blinking too long. When she finally looked up, she asked, "Have they tried to contest any of this?" I shook my head. "They don't know I have it." Her voice didn't rise. She just nodded once and said, "Good. Then we'll stay ahead of them." She photocopied everything and slid the originals into a fireproof folder. "First," she said, "we register these titles under your name formally with the clerk's office. That protects you from last-minute loopholes. Second, we notify any interested third party, banks, buyers, agents, that the will doesn't apply to these assets," I asked. "And if they push back?" She smiled, just barely. "That's when we post the truth publicly." The next call I made was to Javier, a friend of a friend, ex-military. Now a quiet man with sharper instincts than most cops I knew. He met me at a diner and listened without interrupting. When I told him I needed financial trails, especially on Ava and Tom, he took out a notepad and asked, "What am I looking for? Motive?" I said no. "Leverage." He raised an eyebrow, then scribbled something. "I'll be in touch in a week," he said, then added, "Maybe sooner, depending on how dirty they are." It didn't take long. Turns out Ava had already reached out to 3 buyers, tried to pitch Dad's land as a future development site. She'd even drafted mock contracts and had the nerve to call herself the sole inheritor. Tom wasn't much cleaner. He tried to borrow against one of the properties, even forged a utility bill to make it look like he was living on site. Meanwhile, I tracked down Delilah, an older woman who'd rented pasture land from Dad for over a decade. She lived in a small house off County Road 11, chickens in the yard, mailbox hanging on one hinge. When I pulled into her driveway, she squinted at me like I was a ghost. "You're his boy," she said softly. I nodded. "I am." She waved me inside and poured coffee into a chipped mug without asking. When I told her what had happened, she stood up and walked to a cabinet. Inside were old envelopes, all addressed to me. Every rent check for the last 6 months had been made out in my name. "Your dad said it was time," she told me. "Said you'd understand eventually." I swallowed hard. "Did anyone else know?" She looked out the window. "Your sister came around once, asked if she could renegotiate, said she'd soon be managing the land." I told her nothing. "Changes unless you said so." Delilah didn't blink. She left in a hurry. I took the checks and brought them straight to Claire. "Perfect," she said. "This proves financial intent. We'll include it in the record." Then I went to Mike. He'd worked at the town clerk's office longer than I'd been alive. Wore suspenders, still used a rotary phone, but he was sharp. When I handed him the documents, he read through them slowly, then nodded. "I'll mark. These verified. Time-stamped and sealed, nobody's walking this back." A few days later, I got the call from Claire. "It's time," she said. She'd prepared formal cease and desist letters, one for Ava, one for Tom, and a general public notice that the land was not and never had been part of the estate. We posted it online, in the town paper, on the courthouse board. 3 hours after it went live, Ava showed up at Claire's office. I wasn't there, but Claire told me how it played out. She slammed the door open and demanded to speak to someone. In charge, Claire said. I told her she was welcome to file a challenge, but we had notarized deeds, tenant checks, and registry confirmation on our side. Ava reportedly shouted, "This is foul play. My father never would have done this." Claire's response? Calm as always, then why did he sign everything over before he passed? Ava didn't answer. Tom tried a different approach. He showed up at the town clerk's office 2 days later, envelope in hand. Mike told me he looked nervous, sweaty. He asked if there was a way to amend the timeline, Mike told me. Said maybe we could backdate something, offered a donation. Mike leaned across the counter and said, I told him to take his donation and walk out before I filed a report. Then came Uncle Rick. He called me one night around 8:30. I recognized the number but let it go to voicemail. His message was classic Rick, concern laced with snake oil. Hey kid, heard there's been some confusion with the will. I always told your dad we should have been more transparent. Listen, I've got a buddy interested in farmland. Maybe we can work something out. Keep it in the family. I didn't return the call. Instead, I sent one more letter, a simple invitation. Come to Dad's land one last time. No explanations, no lawyers. Just show up. Ava responded with a single word. Fine. Tom texted, What's this about? I didn't reply. The cabin sat at the center of the land they thought they'd inherited. The trees still swayed the same way they did when I was a kid. The wind still cut through the fields in a way that made everything else fall quiet. I stood by the porch when they arrived. Ava got out first, heels sinking into the dirt, eyes scanning like she was already calculating her next move. Tom followed, slower, less sure of himself this time. They didn't speak right away. They just looked at me, then at the land, then at the sign I'd mounted at the gate. It read, Monroe Land Trust, privately owned by Elliot Monroe. No trespassing without permission. Ava's jaw tightened. Tom shifted on his feet. I didn't need to say a word. They saw it. They finally saw it. Everything they schemed for, everything they whispered about, everything they tried to take was already mine. And I didn't fight for it with noise. I let the truth do the talking. Some mornings feel like they remember. The air holds stories. The trees don't move until you do. And the silence? It feels older than memory. That morning was like that. Mist rolled low across the clearing, curling over the grass like breath from the earth itself. I stood alone by the oak. Dad planted the year I was born. Its roots now thick enough to crack rock, its branches stretching like they knew the weight they held, and behind me, the sign, private property. Trespassers will be prosecuted. I heard the gravel crunch before I saw them. First came Ava, wrapped in designer wool, arms folded like armor. Tom followed, less polished, scanning the land like he was still trying to find a loophole in it all. And then, behind them, Margot. She stayed near the edge, eyes flicking between Claire, who stood beside me with calm certainty, and the envelope in her hand. Nobody said anything right away. I let the quiet linger. Then I stepped forward. This spot, I said, pointing to the fence line. This is where he taught me how to fix wire with nothing but a hammer and hands. I looked to the sycamore tree. That's where I planted my first seed. He watched me dig the hole. Didn't say a word, just nodded when I was done. They shifted uncomfortably, like the ground itself had turned on them. I breathed in once. Steady. This land, this silence, it's where he chose me. Not in speeches, not in signatures they could twist, but in action, in trust, in everything they ignored. Ava snapped first. This is pathetic, she said, stepping forward. Dad wouldn't have wanted this. Secret meetings, legal ambushes. You manipulated all of it. Her voice cracked on the last word. Tom's face twisted. You could have come to us. We could have split it, made it fair. I looked at him, really looked. You don't split trust, you don't divide care, you either show up, or you don't. Claire, standing firm, added quietly. The court has already verified the ownership. The will doesn't override deeds that were signed, filed, and notarized 6 months before your father passed. And then, Margot spoke. But not to me. She asked Claire. Is this going to affect my license? Claire tilted her head. There's already a complaint with the board. Whether it becomes an investigation depends on your next move. Margot turned pale. I handed each of them an envelope. Inside, a copy of the deed, the signed letter from Dad, and the stamped court declaration of ownership. No words, just truth. Tom didn't open his. Ava read halfway, then tore hers in half. The pieces fluttered down like dying leaves. I didn't flinch. This land was never yours to steal, I said. It was mine to protect. Nobody moved for a while. Even the wind stayed still. Eventually, they turned and walked back to their cars. No shouting. No grand speeches, just the sound of things ending. As I watched them go, I realized something. This wasn't about land. It never was. It was about being seen. And I had been, by the only one who mattered. Justice didn't roar like thunder. It settled, like fog. Soft, unapologetic, final. After that day in the clearing, everything just went quiet. Ava stopped calling. Tom vanished into some city miles away. Margot's name disappeared from the firm's directory within the month. No, lawsuits came. Claire said the paperwork was bulletproof. Her word, not mine. And the land. It stayed untouched. I didn't sell. Didn't build. I walked it every morning, sometimes barefoot, sometimes with coffee in hand like Dad used to. The fence still stood where we last fixed it together. I never changed a thing, but I did start planting trees, one for every year he raised me in silence. One for every morning we sat side by side and said nothing, but somehow said everything. People asked if it felt like winning. I told them I thought justice would feel like fire, but it felt like morning frost, cold, still, honest. There was no parade, no headlines, just earth and roots, and the soft breath of something sacred being returned to stillness. Because sometimes, love doesn't show up in words or wills. It shows up in the deeds we leave behind. In this land, it was never for them, it was always for me.